So in this final unit, we've been kind of taking a bird's eye view, what you might call a meta view, of all of the stuff that we've been looking at in this semester. Namely, the broad topics of logic, rhetoric, rationality, and argumentation. Today we're going to look at argumentation. Basically, up until this point, I've been trying to convince you that, well, there are certain things that make arguments good, and there are certain things that make arguments bad, right? An argument has this particular technical definition. You engage in an argument in your life, you try to convince people of things, and the general feeling or gist or vibe that philosophy puts off, that science puts off, that our culture puts off, is logic and argumentation are good things. You should use them to change people's minds. They're effective. You should incorporate them in your lives. But one question that might come up for you is, well, is argumentation really that important? Should it be a big part of our lives? Does it matter? Is it effective? Today we're going to be exploring the status of argumentation. And I'm going to give you a perspective that might cast a little bit of doubt on whether or not this is something you should put a lot of time and energy into. But we'll see what you all think. In philosophy papers, in scientific papers, in politics and the media and all of this stuff, logical argumentation takes precedence, right? People say, oh, was it a good argument? Does it make sense? Is it rational? You should make your beliefs accord with the argumentation and the evidence. Since the origin of philosophy, rationality and argumentation has taken precedence over appeals to emotion, over fallacies, over rhetoric. But is it really that useful? We do have a reasoning faculty, right? We can reflect, we can trace arguments to their logical conclusions, we can use induction and deduction in order to make sense of the world. But how useful is that stuff really if we're not rational creatures? Are we purely rational creatures? No. So then how much space does rationality actually take up in our lives, and how we view things and how we act? Well, a few different studies and articles that I'm going to present for you today shed some light on that question. This should lead you to wonder, how much should you really care about this? Although people have the capacity for reason, if people don't really use it, if they don't really accept arguments and then change their worldviews based on it, how useful is it really? Well, we're going to explore that today. One article that I assigned last semester for my students, or I should say last year, was a New Yorker article titled, "Why Facts Don't Change Our Minds." And this article sheds some light on, well, how useful argumentation actually is in human life and in human society. The article discusses a number of things: cognitive science, psychology, basically how the human mind works. You are confronted with facts every day about how the world works, about how things are. For example, if I told you that ordering takeout further degrades the environment, you could be like, yeah, okay, I buy that. That makes sense. Does that change your behavior at all, though? Not at all, right? You're still going to order the Chinese food from down the street, right? If I told you, oh, I know you really want those Air Jordans, but that actually contributes to exploitation in these Asian countries, are you actually going to not buy them? You're probably still going to buy them, right? You can lay facts and data on people, but it takes a lot more to change people's minds and behaviors. What several psychological studies have determined is that, well, humans in general tend to embrace information that already accords with their worldviews. So we have this innate psychological disposition, you might say, to kind of close ourselves off from information that's uncomfortable, from information that contradicts what we believe, how we think the world works. So already what we see is, although we have the capacity for reason, we're not completely thinking or living in accord with what is rational, what is good, what the facts are. You probably have experienced this in your own life. Maybe you've given somebody an argument or a fact and you're like, this should change your behavior, and it doesn't, right? Or you give them evidence about the COVID pandemic or about elections or about climate change or all this stuff, and they're just like, I don't believe that, right? I'm going to look into it, whatever, I think my view is right. And maybe you've done this to people who have offered arguments and facts to you, right? This doesn't necessarily imply a weakness or a defect of character on your part. This is just kind of how the human mind works. We have what is called confirmation bias. In our minds, we're going to privilege those facts and that information that, accords and supports with what we already believe. The cognitive scientists, Mercier and I believe Dan Sperber, wrote this book called The Enigma of Reason that also casts a very interesting light on our reasoning capacities themselves. You might like to think that you are this rational being that operates according to rational principles, that you listen to the information, that you digest it and internalize it, that you change your behavior. That reason is this amazing thing that you have control over, that you use to govern your life in all these different domains. But evidence suggests that is not completely true. In their book, The Enigma of Reason, they argue that our reasoning faculties are actually adaptive mechanisms. They provide a very interesting evolutionary story that basically argues reason isn't this thing that is infallible and that you use and that you got from God. Rather, it's something that humans adapted over many years in order to better live in certain groups. And if that is the case, that might cause you to have some questions about whether or not your reason can actually get to the truth, whether or not your reason is aimed at generating truth and a better understanding of the world, whether or not reason actually does what you think it's doing. Maybe your reasoning faculties, again, are just what humans have evolved in order to live together better. And if that's true, it might make sense that we have this confirmation bias thing. It might make sense that we live like that. And it would seem to imply that maybe the outputs or the products of our reasoning capacities are aimed towards a different kind of goal than we thought they were. all of this should cause you to reflect on the fallibility of your reason, how you actually use it in your life, and whether or not you're exercising it willfully and towards the goals that you have in your mind. Other psychologists and cognitive scientists, like Sloman and Fernbach, have shown that when it comes to the self-reporting of our own knowledge, humans tend to report that they know a lot more than they actually do. There's a funny little stereotype that goes along with college students, right? Did you hear this from your parents? Oh, you went to college and now you think you know how the world works, right? Especially if you got into an argument with them or something. Now, I'm not here to question your intelligence or what you know, but it seems to be true across the board that people overinflate how much they actually know and how much they understand about the world. In truth, we all know a minuscule amount of how reality works and what's out there. How many animal species can you name? How many stars and galaxies can you name? Do you know how they work? Do you know how the universe got here? Do you know how the cells in your own body work? If not, well, along with this kind of information, that should cause you to reflect on, well, how you approach others, how you utilize arguments in your life, how important they are, and perhaps the virtue of open-mindedness as well, which is something that I've been kind of pushing since the beginning of this class, right? Given our limited knowledge and given our ego and our overinflated confidence in our own knowledge, we should be thinking hard about our own place in these conversations and about the knowledge and experience that we bring to the table. In addition, the article also speaks of some other scientists, the Gormans, who argue that we also have some strange cognitive mechanisms that actually produce pleasure in us when we stick to our beliefs in the face of contradictory views and evidence. What does all of this imply? Well, it seems to imply that the value of argumentation, of logic and argumentation, might not be as great as we thought it was. Why? Well, we have all these different mechanisms and dispositions to reject information, to presume that we know more than we think we do, to reinforce our own beliefs. Which raises a question. If all of this is true, if we think we know more than we do, if we derive pleasure from sticking to our beliefs, if facts don't change people's minds, what does argumentation really matter? Should we engage in it? Is it useful? Should we waste our time with it? Well, personally, I would say it's not completely a waste of time. I think conversation and discussion can be good. It can help people learn more about the world. It can help you learn and grow. But these facts need to be reckoned with, right? And so you might find in your life, supposing all this is true, that although you learned a lot of cool stuff about logic and rationality and argumentation, that might not be the best way to reach people. That might not be the best way to change hearts and minds. But you'll have to reflect on your own experience and see if that's true. In any case, there seems to be scientific evidence to support that that is true. I like that funny photo I found. It's really goofy. I think it captures this sentiment perfectly, right? We think of ourselves as these reasonable, rational creatures, that we live rationally, we think rationally, we're open-minded, we're knowledgeable. But there's a lot of evidence out there that says, probably not, right? And so I hope that this compels you to engage in some self-reflection, not only on the purpose and value of this class, but also on a lot of the ideas that we've been looking at this entire time. You can use all the philosophical argumentation in the world, but if they're not open to new information, if they don't want to change their minds, it's unlikely that that's going to have a lot of impact on them, right? And I bet you kind of know this intuitively already. You've heard the phrase, you can lead a horse to water, right? But you can't make them drink it. Think about the people in your lives that you think are living in an unhealthy way, or they have an addiction, or they need help, and they're not changing, right? You can give them all the reasons in the world, like Jerry, for 3 months, every Friday and Saturday you've been buying 8 balls of Coke. This probably isn't good for you, right? I think you have a problem. The facts and the arguments aren't going to get Jerry to change, right? Unless he wants to change his behavior. Unless he changes his mindset. He changes his priorities. So we could extend that minor example to, all the other things that we've been talking about in this class. We looked at Descartes' arguments for personal identity, the existence of God. We looked at C.S. Lewis's arguments for the existence of God. We looked at all those essays that were encouraging what? Anarchism and self-reflection and more stuff about God and why silence is a virtue and all these different things. And maybe you think those arguments are good, but within the human being, there's a tension between our rational side and our emotional side. Between what you might call the mind and the heart. Though philosophy and science and our culture broadly privileges reason and rationality, if your goal is to change the world, you might be better off putting your energy elsewhere. Perhaps into the use of rhetoric, or perhaps into other methods of influencing how people feel. Because that is going to have a huge hold over what they do and whether they listen, how they feel. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. We could dive a little bit more deeply into psychology and neuroscience by looking at another article from Psych Central titled Humans Are Governed by Emotions. One of the things that this article talks about is an idea of how the human mind works that we can find in Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Have you ever heard of this book before? Basically, what Kahneman tries to demonstrate is that we have two different thinking mechanisms, set of mechanisms and processes in our minds, in the human brain. Two systems that we use in order to make judgments, make decisions, think through things, and act. What are called the deliberative and affective systems. The affective system, what is called System 1 a lot in the literature, is fast. It's what produces a snap judgment or decision or feeling within you, right? When you put your hand on a stove and then instinctively your hand shoots up. You didn't think consciously about pulling your hand up. Some sort of process went on in your brain, right? That went along with that reaction, a very fast process. Or it's the judgment that you make of someone when you see them for the first time, right? Boom. Just a kind of feeling or judgment appears to you. That would be the affective system in work. It's very fast and it's useful for some things, right? Say if we were living in the jungle and we had to decide whether or not to fight or flee, very useful system, right? If you had to spend minutes thinking about every little thing consciously, the human race would have been dead, right? This is our default decision-making system. It's good for producing thoughts and judgments and decisions quickly, but it is inflexible. You might say, in large part, it is outside of our control. It's going to generate a certain decision or judgment or feeling involuntarily. Luckily for us, this isn't the only system at work in our thinking and decision making. There's also the deliberative system, system 2. And this one is flexible, but it's very slow. This is the system that allows you to consciously reflect on something, like a problem or an issue. For example, should I break up with my girlfriend? Okay, let's list all the pros and cons. Let's look at this side. How does that weigh against this side? When you're thinking through a problem or an issue like that, that's the deliberative system at work. And our thoughts, our judgments, the way our brains work, it's constituted by the complex interactions between these two systems. Some of our judgments and feelings are produced by this one, and we can employ this one as well if we want to, right? If we can slow things down, if we actually take the time to consciously reflect and think about stuff. We would not be alive if it weren't for both of these systems. They're both critical. All right? You might say this one is critical for our survival. This one has been critical, the deliberative system, for like all of our technological advancements and everything, right? Our scientific pursuits and knowledge and all of that stuff. That was people sitting down and thinking about things and designing experiments and designing technologies and working with it and creating it. Hence the title of his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. He tries to uncover how these systems work, how they influence people. And there's kind of an implicit encouragement to utilize this system more. Because we don't have to worry so much about fighting or fleeing now that we've kind of mastered nature to some degree and we've built up these structures and societies where we can live and operate and cooperate. And I've been encouraging you to lean into using the deliberative system in this class as well. And if you lean into using that, if you reflect, if you consciously think, if you trace arguments and logical connections and relationships, you can strengthen this system and you can make it better. But this system is also always going to be a part of you. And that's something that you should recognize. And something that you should realize when you do have snap judgments and feelings about how someone looks, how someone comes across to you, what you should do, etc. The article says, the situations that most require a careful, well-reasoned response are those in which our emotions are most likely to sabotage our long-term interests. And so when it comes to survival, System 1 is very useful. Again, we would be dead without it. But in our lives, we're going to have to make a lot of important decisions that would be better served by utilizing System 2. The problem is those big decisions, those big judgments, important judgments, are often ones that go along with these complex and deep emotions, which might make actually thinking through things in a logical and argumentative way very difficult, right? When tensions are high, when we're feeling a lot of anger or sadness or resentment, it makes it makes working through all of this stuff a lot more difficult. The lesson that we get from the article is that because we have both of the systems operating, because it produces all of these judgments and ideas and thoughts within us, we need to take care not to let ourselves be overcome by those involuntary thoughts and judgments and those involuntary emotions. That is the moral of the story, if we were watching an episode of Sesame Street or something. But the fact remains, we have all the data that we saw in the previous article, and then we have the data in this article, which supports the idea that we are not these purely rational beings. We are not motivated to think and act just based on what is rational. We don't live in a perfect world of rationality. Our mind doesn't work that way. Which again raises the question, if we're motivated by emotion, if those emotions and those snap judgments and decisions that just pop up and compel us to think and act in certain ways, if those occur first and if those are strong, what use is all this argument stuff? Does it even matter? How much should you lean into it in your life? Maybe it has more to do with the people you surround yourself with. I don't know. But it casts doubt on the primacy of rationality in our lives, of this story that we tell ourselves, right? That, we're rational and reasonable people. Well, the fact of the matter is, perhaps most of the time we're not. Most of the time what we're thinking and doing hasn't been consciously thought through. It hasn't been reasoned. It isn't based on facts and evidence, but these kind of ethereal intuitions and experiences that we might not be able to put into words or completely understand. This leads us into the reading that I actually asked y'all to do for today, which is Michael Shermer's Why People Believe in Weird Things. And in this book, he explores all the different weird things that people believe. He tries to build a case that, there are a lot of different causes for these weird beliefs. We should try to, not believe false things ourselves. We should try to get other people to believe true and reasonable things and get people to believe in science. He's a big proponent of science. But he too tries to provide an explanation for, why are we not as rational as we think we are? Bless you. Where do these ideas and snap judgments and weird thoughts come from? Well, as we'll see, they come from a bunch of different sources. He goes through a number of weird beliefs in this book. He's like, people believe in conspiracy theories, right? Go on the internet and you'll see all kinds of conspiracies. The Bronze Age collapse conspiracy, right? Y'all ever heard of that one? Well, you can look it up yourself. That's a fun rabbit hole. Aliens and UFOs and paranormal stuff. That was a trick of the mind, you dummy. Why are people believing in ghosts and demons? This is me pretending to be Michael Shermer. He even likens the belief in God to a weird belief that isn't based on reason or data or evidence. Psychics, mediums, tarot card readers who tell you what you want to hear, Holocaust deniers. He lumps all of these beliefs into the category of weird. He doesn't develop a rigid taxonomy for them. He basically says, well, you know it when you see it. You can tell when you're dealing with a weirdo. Maybe you have somebody in your life that believes something weird. I don't know. We probably all believe something weird, right? Personally, I believe that there are tiny goblins in the quantum foam dancing and playing music. No, I don't. But that would be cool. The general gist we get from his book is there's an insistence on empiricism as an epistemology. We should believe, what scientific experience and evidence and experiments have given us. We should modify our beliefs to the facts, to the data, and we should get other people to do this stuff too, because, he thinks that if people are believing all of these irrational things, and they are, that's going to cause problems, and it's going to cause conflicts, right? And no amount of argumentation is going to get people to believe in different stuff, right? You may have had this experience when dealing with somebody who is a religious person. You give them all these scientific evidence and arguments against the existence of God, right? And what do they say sometimes? Well, I don't believe in God because of the evidence. It's all about faith. Or if you're talking to somebody who does believe in a conspiracy and you're like, what about this evidence and this evidence and this evidence? There's no evidence for this conspiracy. What are you talking about? What do they say? Yeah, the fact that there's no evidence means there's a cover-up. Are you stupid? Right? They'll say that the lack of evidence is evidence for the conspiracy. And so there are all these different ways to rationalize these things. But at bottom, it seems that a lot of what we believe, again, it's not strictly rational. It's not based on argumentation. It doesn't seem to be how the human mind works, even though we wish it were so. He goes through a number of different possible explanations for why people believe weird things. He says, thinkers have thought for a long time it has to do with lack of education and miseducation. Think about people who grow up in cults, who are fed a particular view of the world. That is all they know. They haven't had any other experiences, right? They're given a worldview. That worldview is reinforced. They're punished if they don't think it and act it out. Miseducation. Or there's been lack of education, right? I'm sure Michael Shermer would have a lot of problems with our education system in the West. And how it's, not teaching people to be rational, on how it's giving them facts without context and all these different things. If we extend out the definition of education, we might also say it's not just the school system that are feeding people these ideas, but it's other people out there in the world, people you have conversations with. It's what you watch on your screens, right? Maybe you've gotten some ideas from watching TikToks or watching stories on Instagram, right? Or certain ideas or advertisements have planted ideas in your head, right? About what you should want, about how the world works, etc. So there's that, right? False information is getting into people. It's causing them to misbelieve things. It's causing them to believe things that aren't true. He says, philosophers and thinkers have also said, it's because people are just not engaging their critical thinking skills. If they were actually taught to engage their critical thinking skills, maybe they wouldn't believe all these weird things. It's another possible explanation. And then he says a bunch of contradictory explanations have been offered with respect to religion, right? Some people are going to say, well, religion is to blame with people being irrational, right? People are conditioned from a young age to believe in a sky daddy with a beard. Other people will say, actually, it's the decline of religion. Why? Well, some people think that there is an innate religious or spiritual drive within humans. And for a long time, religion in the West has channeled that drive, sublimated that drive into the natural sciences. This is how the natural sciences were born in Europe during the Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution. Most of those guys were Christians. And their belief in God and His goodness and the wonder of His creation is what motivated them to study it. And they're like, I got to figure out how this shit works. Like, why did God make it like this? And so, with the death of God, with the dissolution of religion in the West, some people think, well, now people are just, grasping at any ideology or worldview that gives them that sense of comfort and fulfillment. And maybe Christianity did a better job of keeping people reasonable. I don't know. Religion perhaps has been replaced by these other more irrational ideologies or worldviews. I don't know, is believing in God more irrational than believing this is all a simulation? A lot of people believe that nowadays. I don't know. Shermer also says, another explanation that's been offered is, well, people are afraid of science, so they don't want to look into it. They don't want to think scientifically. Why would people be afraid of science? Can you think of any reasons? Yeah.
It tells them something they do every day is bad for them, like smoking when it first came out, their studies. People were like, they won't believe them.
Yeah, okay, so it kind of makes them feel bad, maybe, and they don't want to have to deal with that, so I'm not going to look at that, right? Or the study came out when I was in college, I think, that showed a link between the development of cancers and heart disease and processed meats, like deli meats that you get in those, plastic packages. A lot of people eat that stuff, right? So, yeah, maybe they're just not looking at that. I'm not ready to deal with that, right? I like my Hillshire Farms honey ham, right? Or whatever it's called. I don't know all the brands. Why else? Why might people be afraid of science? Well, what has science given us? Answers? Yeah. Think more technologically. What did science give us at the end of World War II? The atomic bomb? That's some scary shit, right? Never before in human history have we had the means to destroy ourselves and the earth if we wanted to. And now we do have that. Science has given us that. That's a reason to fear science, right? Science has the potential to release upon us these terrifying powers that we might not be moral enough or wise enough to wield correctly. So yeah, why would you lean into that? Think about viruses and bacteria that we are experimenting with and on. That's some scary stuff. Now scientists say it's not a matter of if the next pandemic happens, it's just a matter of when. Because we're dealing with some scary stuff. Think about the advent of genetic technology. CRISPR. We're doing more research and investigation into that, such that probably in the coming decades, we're going to be able to mess with unborn children's genes and gene expression so that we can determine their eye color, their hair color, their intelligence, the kind of mental dispositions that they have and personality traits. Perhaps make them super strong, super fast, have a lot of stamina. Think of that, the Pandora's box that is. We start messing with children's genes, people worry we're going to have a Gattaca situation. Has anybody seen that movie? Gattaca? Sci-fi film about a dystopian futuristic human society where gene editing has become a thing. Who gets access to the technology first? All the rich people. And so all of the smart, strong people with jobs are the rich kids, and all the poor people are stuck in poverty and inequality and starvation and death. Because they can't compete with the rich kids, because they're made smarter and faster and stronger than anybody else. And then if you keep going down this thought process, you might think, oh my goodness, gene editing, super criminals? We're going to have to worry about super criminals? Oh my God, how are we going to fight the super criminals? Super police. Do we want super police running around? Who can, punch you and break your neck, in the blink of an eye? Or worry about, other countries making super soldiers. So there are a few different reasons you might fear what science is capable of and not really look into it, not investigate it, kind of turn a blind eye to it, right? Encourage others not to do that stuff. Because it has the potential to unleash a lot of opportunities for us, a lot of technologies. And then finally, another cause that he mentions is, there's a lot of poor parenting out there, Parents aren't doing a good job of teaching their kids how to think rationally, how to assess arguments, how to engage in analysis, how to do their research. Maybe that's true. He offers a few explanations of his own as well, as to why people believe these irrational things. Have these weird beliefs. One of the things that has already been brought up is it's comforting. Think of how destabilizing it is to grow up, let's say, in a particular religion, and you see the world in a particular way, and that rug is pulled out from under you. Your whole world is upset. Right? You don't know what's right, what's wrong. You don't know what is true and what is false. You're confused. You're lost. Right? But holding on to what you've been taught, holding on to your beliefs, that's comforting. Because it's predictable. Because it gives you an explanation for how reality works. Even if it's wrong, right? It gives you some security. It gives you some psychological comfort. And having to change your mind, having to confront the facts and look at contradictory evidence, that is scary. Right? For this reason, a lot of people, they lie to themselves. And they don't want to look at the truth. Because that's hard, and that's difficult, and that's scary. It's the same thing with, the example he uses is religion. Religion gives you a particular view of the world. We can take Christianity as an example. What does Christianity give you? It gives you a meaning, gives you a purpose. It says you were created for a reason. It says your existence is not a cosmic accident. It says that there is something up there that is looking out for you, that has a hand in things, right? And it says if you live the right way, you're going to be able to experience communion with God, eternal paradise with Him. And it promises, well, the universal establishment of justice at the end of time, right? Things will be made right. The right people will be punished. The right people will be rewarded. And creation will be made anew. That's a very comforting belief. It's also difficult for us to change our minds, to update our beliefs, right? That requires hard work. Does any of you really want to spend your time reading and thinking hard about a philosophy text or a scientific text to try to figure out how the world works better and to have more true beliefs than false beliefs? No! Who wants to do that? That's boring. We'd rather watch our anime or watch Alone from the History Channel. Or, play baseball outside and not question this stuff, not worry about it. Because again, that's hard work, that's difficult. It's easier just to remain static, right? Remain where we are. He also says that people are going to tend to gravitate towards the simpler explanations. Again, he holds up science as the paradigmatic example of like the best worldview, the most rational, the most true. And he's like, if you look at science, man, that shit is complex. We have people who spend decades of their lives studying one niche thing in science. And they still don't know all there is to know, right? About the mating habits of bats. Or, why a particular species is symbiotic with another. Or planet formation at the beginning of the universe. Right? This stuff is hard and complex. And people have a difficulty understanding a lot of things. They can't wrap all their minds around it. And so a lot of these weird beliefs, well, they offer simpler explanations for things. Things that could be understood better. And finally, for people, he says, a lot of their weird beliefs offer them a standard of morality, a purpose, and a meaning to their lives. He says that if you look at science soberly and honestly, he says, well, what science seems to imply is that our existence is a cosmic accident. We're just an animal like anything else, descended from a common ancestor. There's not an objective reason why we're here. And that's unnerving to people, and it's destabilizing, and they don't want to look at that. So, we have all of these non-rational motivators for why people have the beliefs and views that they do. This isn't just a problem for other people, right? This includes us as well. We all have our blind spots. We all have things that we don't want to look at or confront. A lot of what we think and believe isn't motivated by, I've looked at the evidence and the data and I've come to a reasonable conclusion. No. Right? Maybe most of what we believe and think isn't the result of that deliberative system 2 analysis and synthesis. This class is called Logic and Argument. We've been going through so many arguments, so many different perspectives, so many reasons for these different views. But it would seem that although we want to be rational and reasonable, the deck is kind of stacked against us. And although we want other people to be rational and reasonable, they're motivated to think and say and do and believe things for all of these non-rational reasons. So what should we do? How should we feel about all this? What should our response be? In your personal experience, do you think people are likely to change their minds if you give them evidence and data? What do you think? Yeah? Yeah, Maddie?
I think it depends on the person. Some people are stubborn and shit and just can't be.
Some people are stubborn. Yeah, you know people in your life like that?
Yeah.
Would you say the average person is stubborn?
I am.
You're like I am, and so when I look out and I judge other people about what they might be like, oh, I kind of. You're never wrong. Yeah. So, would you answer this in the negative?
Yeah.
People are not likely to be super rational. What do the rest of y'all think? Yeah.
Like, I feel like some people are so into like conspiracies that no matter what you say, no matter what science says, what government says, they will not believe anything. Like they just won't. Like nothing you say can change their beliefs.
Yeah. I've certainly encountered people like that. And we're all probably like that with one thing or another, right? I'm trying to think about a personal belief that I have that I don't think I'm ever going to change my mind on. You can't change my mind that the Dark Souls video games are not masterpieces. I'm never going to change my mind on that. I'm not even open to any argument. Don't even try. Right? Yeah, what are you going to say?
I was just gonna say that I feel like there's also people that like are very easily influenced sometimes.
Yeah.
I think that like you like will go off of like what anybody says.
Do you think they're more influenced by evidence and argumentation, or are they more influenced by other things?
Probably a combination of both.
Okay. So there are some people whose personality kind of gives them over to accepting what other people say more easily than others? Okay, so maybe it's going to depend on who they encounter, right?
I was going to say, I think a lot of people like that, it depends on who they're around. Like, if people around them accept an idea, then they're really quick to just be like, yeah, sure, even if the data doesn't prove it. You know, like they won't go out on a limb by themselves.
So people are influenced by what others around them are doing. Why do you think that is?
Because they want to be accepted.
Kind of gets back to Mercier's and Sperber's point, right? They hypothesized that reason is an adaptive mechanism for us to live better in groups. Have you had an experience where you were with a group and somebody said something and everybody just agreed with it, even though you know they don't all believe it? Yeah, so there's probably something to that, right? We have these different, not only internal pressures to believe certain things due to our emotions, our experiences, but also external pressures from society, from the people that we're spending time with, right? Yeah, all these different pressures that are influencing us to take up certain ideas, not take up others. You all seem a little bit pessimistic about people's, tendency to be rational and reasonable. Is that the gist? That's what I'm getting. So then why are you in this class? What's the point? You're just like, I don't know. I didn't decide to be here rationally. I just needed a credit. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
So we don't fit into that category of people who aren't rational.
So you think that, are you doing this for yourself? Like you're taking this class to, I don't know, just pursue your own interests?
Yeah.
Is anybody taking this class because they thought it might help them like do things out there in the world and convince people? Yeah? I think by just being here and by talking through this stuff, you are strengthening those critical thinking muscles and perhaps your argumentative muscles as well. But don't overestimate your own ability to change people's minds. Because again, sometimes people just aren't going to, well, they're not going to look at the data and the evidence, right? And they're not going to listen to you. And that might not be any fault of yours, you know? And I think if we look deep within ourselves too, we'll find that, oh, the same is true for us, you know? There are some things that we probably won't budge on. But perhaps this isn't a failure of logic and argumentation. Depending on how you feel about it, maybe this is just a defect of human beings. I don't know. If you think reason and rationality and argumentation is awesome, you know, and it's top dog, you know, and it's cool and we should be using it, then maybe it'll be like, yeah, all this information just tells me that humans are imperfect, fallible creatures, you know. Maybe it doesn't cast any doubt on the value of argumentation itself. I don't know. I like to have conversations. So I have an intrinsic motivation to kind of argue and discuss. But I know not everybody is like that. But the vibe I'm getting from y'all is that people are not always rational, can't always change their minds. Do you think that's bad? Do you wish that would change about people or not?
Well, I think it's tough because you have to find good sources for reason. Like, if you go on Instagram or Twitter or something, you can find a bunch of people quoting different facts that contradict each other.
Okay.
And so I think part of being alive at this time is you have to be able to like block out a lot of evidence. Even like some of it might be good, but a lot of it's total crap. And so you have to be able to block that out.
That is an awesome point. Because the last lecture that we're going to do is looking at whether or not it's possible for us to come to the truth in this information overload era. So that's a good idea. But we'll talk about that more on Thursday. But is it bad? If you think that people are not open-minded, they don't listen to reason, they're not rational, you wish they weren't like that. Yes or no? Thumbs up for yes, you wish they weren't like that. No for I don't care. Okay, to those of you who are saying yes, is there anything that can be done about that? I mean, maybe we could like brainwash everybody, you know, go all supervillain and like Tsukiyomi everyone like in Naruto, and I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, I don't really know if they do it like from this point on, or like all the current people, but I think we can definitely like start teaching like I guess younger kids to be more open-minded than what they usually are. We need to teach them to like stay that way.
Okay.
Because like I feel like there's a lot of people now that they're just like they're not gonna change. Like
So,
you said like you're never gonna change on the Dark Souls game. So
never.
it's just, like,
Yep.
And you will stand by that till the day you die. You know, like no matter what happens, that's your opinion. And I think people are very strong about opinions that they feel so correct about, I guess, or feel so strongly about.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we could definitely teach, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I think we should definitely be open to other things, and we could definitely teach the younger generation to.
Okay. So maybe instead of trying to change people's characters and minds, who have gone through that education and socialization process, maybe we reform how we parent and educate the next generation. Makes sense to me. I don't know. But of course you would only do that if you think this is a problem. Right? In any case, I hope what this investigation today has done for you is got you to think a little bit about, the value of the arguments that we've been looking at. The value of this class. There are a billion perspectives about everything. A billion views. You could find evidence for almost any proposition. Right? It's not always apparent whether or not we're being rational. But again, if one of the critiques that we saw already in this class is true, maybe that's not the be-all, end-all. And maybe trying to convince other people of things isn't the be-all, end-all of human life either. But, I don't know, that's something you'll have to make up your minds about. Does anybody have any final questions, comments, concerns? Otherwise, I'll let you go a little bit early. Okay. Thank you very much for coming. I will see you all on Thursday, okay?